The most impressive photos from the conference. Trump-Kim in Singapore. President Trump and Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, held a historic meeting on Tuesday in Singapore. They signed a joint statement, short on details, in which Mr. Trump said he would provide the North with security guarantees and Mr. Kim again committed to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. President Trump met Kim Jong-un in a carefully choreographed encounter in Singapore on Tuesday, opening a new chapter between the United States and North Korea. Mr. Trump's motorcade on the way to the meeting with Mr. Kim. The two leaders, flanked by aides, during their meeting. Mr. Trump and Mr. Kim after the signing ceremony. Security personnel and media workers outside the Capella Hotel on Sentosa Island, Singapore. Commuters in Singapore reading a newspaper with images of Mr. Kim. The summit meeting dominated the front pages of South Korean newspapers in Seoul. The two leaders took a stroll after their lunch. At the signing ceremony. "We're ready to write a new chapter between our nations," Mr. Trump said at a news conference after the meeting. Journalists at the International Press Center in Singapore credit taking pictures of Mr. Kim's motorcade in Singapore. A member of Mr. Kim's security detail wearing a pin showing the North Korean leader's grandfather Kim Il-sung, left, and father, Kim Jong-il. Credit Mr. Trump boarded Air Force One as he prepared to leave Singapore. Singapore's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Vivian Balakrishnan, left, took a photograph with Mr. Kim during a tour of some of the sites in Singapore. North Koreans watched a large screen at the main train station in Pyongyang as their leader, Mr. Kim, was greeted Monday by Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong of Singapore. South Korean soldiers looked at ribbons with inscriptions calling for peace and reunification on a military fence near the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas. People gathered outside the presidential palace in Singapore. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Center, answered questions at a press briefing before the summit meeting. Mr. Trump met with Prime Minister Lee of Singapore before the summit meeting. Mr. Kim arrived in Singapore from North Korea. Members of the news media waited at the entrance of the St. Regis Hotel in Singapore, where Mr. Kim was staying. The motorcade carrying Mr. Kim arrived at the St. Regis. Mr. Trump arrived in Singapore aboard Air Force One. Police officers patrolled the premises of the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore ahead of the summit meeting.